Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to the Blood in the Void video series, which is basically the section of Imperial Armor Volume 9, the Badab War Part 1. It's a section of the book that gives you space boarding action rules for Warhammer 40k. Which represents fighting on a space station, on a boarding an enemy starship, cleansing a space Hulk, stuff like that. You can even utilize it, if you want to be creative about it, to assault complexes on a planet. Basically, any type of fighting inside a big area, like a ship or a complex or something like that. Excuse me. The reason why I'm doing this, the reason why I'm going to go over all the rules that they have here as best I can and as quickly as I can, is because this book is $75 pretty much on Games Workshop's website. It's an expensive book. If you're not a fan of Space Marines, you probably don't want to spend $75 for one small chapter of the entire book. So I don't think it's fair for people who are interested. And yes, there are plenty of fan-made special rules and stuff like that, but anybody who's interested in what is entailed in Blood in the Void, this video series is for you. This is what I'm basing my Angels of Fury on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over in pretty much 15-minute segments. Even though I can go over 15 minutes, I don't want to, because I want to talk on and possibly bore people too much. I'm going to talk about as much as I can, starting from the beginning of Blood in the Void, all the way to the end of these battle stratagems, in a series of 15-minute videos. Now, what I'm also going to do is, hopefully that'll be like 2 parts, maybe it'll be 3 parts, I think, in total, most, hopefully. But what I'm also doing is, in going through this, I am formulating in my head my own version of Blood in the Void rules. I'll call it Keepers, or Fortress Monastery Blood in the Void, or whatever it is. And I'm going to write up those rules. It's heavily inspired by this Imperial Armor book special rules for this. So it's going to have a lot of stuff being pretty much the same. But it's going to have more clarifications on things, a little bit more clear cut about certain rules, and stuff like that. And also, while this is a rule set from this book, can be used for any army, Eldar, Tau, whatever. I'm gonna make clear distinctions, I should say, I guess, or make it clear for what armies to have certain conflictions. If that's even a word. Certain conflicts of following the rules because of a certain unit choice, or whatever. I'm going to go more in depth into that in my rules. So I'm going to have it written down, and when I have that finished, I'll do a video on that as well. But Blood in the Void, here we go, part 1, from the beginning. Fighting a boarding action. Basically, all boarding missions must have an attacker and a defender, which you can determine however you want to, but you need one of each. Usually decide before you play, and before you even deploy or anything. Because boarding actions are fought in quite dense terrain and without the assistance of transport vehicles, what happens is it can be hard to get around. So they recommend a 4-foot by 4-foot area for gains of 1,500 points or less. Per side, of course. Force selection. The attackers and defenders have their own force organization chart to refer to. The attacker has to take 1 HQ and 1 elite, that's their compulsory choices. But they can have a total of 2 HQs, 4 elites, 2 fast attack, 5 troops, 2 heavy support. The defender has to take 1 HQ and 1 troop choice. However, they can take a total of 2 HQs, 4 elites, 1 fast attack, 5 troops, and 3 heavy support. Forces selected for fighting in a boarding action should be chosen from their codex as normal with the following exceptions. Units may not select dedicated transport options. No vehicles except for walkers and artillery, and they may be mounted on a base of 60 millimeters or less. If they're on a bigger base, they're not allowed. And the terrain may still confine your use of these models, so be careful. In Codex Space Marine Army, assault squads without jump packs count as troop choices for boarding assault missions. Special rules. Rules for reserves, scouts, and infiltrators remains unchanged unless otherwise stated by a specific mission description. However, only units which are described as being able to teleport or materialize from the warp may use the Deep Strike special rules. for example, Terminators and Chaos Demons. Barrage weapons cannot be used to fire indirectly in boarding action missions. Makes sense. Hazardous ground. Fighting within the environment of star vessel or station is a dangerous and treacherous affair. Basically, bikes, artillery, and walkers treat all difficult terrain they encounter as dangerous terrain as well. Should any of these use a turbo boost, they must take a dangerous terrain test regardless of the ground they cover. All models counting as jump infantry which move more than 6 inches in the movement phase must take a dangerous terrain test every time they do so. The Cold Void. Now this is a special rule that's not always in effect, but when it is in effect, the following rules apply. All weapons and attacks with a strength of 4 or higher now cause a rending effect unless their target is void hardened, which is a stratagem, has an armor value, or has a save of 2+. In this case, in the case of attacks against mixed units, apply these rending wounds to more vulnerable targets first. All weapons and attacks which already have the rending effect now rend on a roll of a 5 or 6, unless their target is void hardened, has an armor value, or has a save of 2+. In the case of attacks against mixed units, apply these rending wounds to the more vulnerable targets first. Just to clarify, weapon strength 4 or higher now rend, unless their target meets the following exceptions meets the exceptions I already talked about. Weapons that rend already rend a little bit better, except against void hardened, having an armor value or a save of 2+. They still rend normally, they just don't rend any better. Weapons and attacks which have the blast special rule now cause pinning if they didn't already do so. Catastrophic damage. This is a special rule you can use, which usually is used to represent fighting on a starship, in the middle of a battle, or maybe took some damage and there's secondary damage happening and whatnot. They're represented by the catastrophic damage table. And when the catastrophic damage special rule is in effect, each player should roll a d6 at the beginning of each game turn. The results of these rolls are added together, and the results on the following table apply for this turn. If you roll a 2 or 3, 2 to 3 I should say, total, you get Hullquake. A total of 4 to 5 is Power Surge. A total of 6 to 9 is No Effect. A total of 10 to 11 is Wildfire, and a 12 total is Structural Collapse. No Effect has no effect for that turn, nothing happens. Power Surge, basically what happens is, if this result is rolled, then the night fighting rules are in effect this turn. If they were already in effect, they are no longer in effect this turn, as the Power Surge unexpectedly fires, lights up, and whatnot. Basically, the Power Surge drains energy in the area for lighting, and so on, temporarily, or repowers it temporarily. Additionally, if they are being used, bulkheads and airlock doors, which are a stratagem, may either open or shut on their own on a d6 roll of 5 up. Roll once separately for each one. Hullquake. All clear terrain is counted as difficult for this turn, and already existing difficult terrain is counted as both difficult and dangerous terrain for this turn. Wildfire. Basically, when this happens, divide the board into sectors as shown on the catastrophic damage diagram. It's basically corded off, top left being 1, top right being 2, bottom left being 3, bottom right being 4, 5 and 6 being the center. Roll a d6 plus 1 to see how many explosions occur in total. Randomize the location of these explosions, rolling a d6 and referring to a diagram to find the starting point, with a 5 or 6 indicating the center of the table. And then use the scatter dice and 3d6 to determine where each one occurs. Explosions which scatter off the table are assumed to be lost. Place the large blast marker on the point where each explosion occurs. Any unit or model caught in the blast suffers a Strength 5, AP 5 pinning attack. And lastly, Structural Collapse. Basically, when this happens, roll d6 and consult the catastrophic damage diagram, the thing I already described to you, to determine what area the collapse occurs. If it's a 5 or a 6 is rolled, all areas are affected equally, which is really catastrophic. All models with a toughness score in the affected area suffer an immediate Strength 4 rending hit, and models with an armor value, including special terrain and so on, suffer a glancing hit on a 4+. From this point on, the Cold Void special rules are in effect for the rest of the battle if they were not previously in effect. And that's catastrophic damage. Now there are shipboard battlefields. basically, these rules give you three different, I guess, types of battles you can fight in a ship. Not so much types of battles, but three different types of terrain, really, if you want to think about it that way. You have ship vaults, deck levels, and the outer hull. I'm going to talk about ship vaults in this video, and then in part 2 I'll start it up with deck levels and continue on from there. Basically, ship vaults represent things like cavernous holds, cargo bays, weapon batteries, and flight decks, which can run to thousands of square meters in volume and provide natural battlegrounds and strategically vital rallying areas in a boarding action. Shipboard vaults represent the standard, quote-unquote, default form of a battlefield fought over in a boarding action. Now what this means is basically you fight a standard game of 40k. Like, what you play normally, that's what it would be in ship vaults, only following the Blood in the Void rules. Vaults can be represented by the square or rectangular area on which should be placed terrain, and the total footprint, roughly a quarter of the surface, arranged roughly evenly across the table. Packing crates, barrels, cargo pods, and machinery of all shapes and sizes are perfect examples of terrain for a vault. Buildings and even ruins can also be freely used to represent sealed compartments, control rooms, particularly large areas of machinery, as well as access towers to other decks. The vault terrain also benefits from having things like gantries, companionways, and landings as part of the scenery to add the feel of fighting within the hull of a massive ship or space station. Likewise, deadfalls and impassable pits can represent cavernous drops into lower levels, and swing bridges can be used as strategic choke points across them. Basically, have a little bridge going across the bottomless pit type of thing. So that's it for part 1 of Blood in the Void. Like I said, I'm doing this because I think it's unfair for people who may be interested in what these rules are to have me go out and spend like $75 basically on a book. Quite frankly, it's a really high price, and I know because I paid it. So that's part 1. Part 2, we'll be continuing on talking about deck levels, which is like think Space Hulk, the game type of area for fighting. Outer hull, which is an interesting idea, not the biggest fan of it. Then we'll talk about the boarding assault mission, what like a basic sample or basic loadout for a very standard no frills boarding assault mission. And we'll conclude talking about Blood on the Void, following up with boarding assault stratagems. There's general stratagems, attacker stratagems, and defender stratagems. They also make mention of the Planet Strike and Seas of Death stratagems in here, not specific ones, but they make mention of those stratagems, meaning if you can make a clever excuse for why they work, and obviously certain ones may not work, like meteorite impacts or whatever, type of thing, might not work too well unless you represent the outer hull, but anyway, point is, some of them can also work in a boarding assault mission. So that's part 1. We covered the very basics. We're gonna continue on in part 2 with deck levels and moving on from there. So that's pretty much it. And until next time, take it easy.